Morena, welcome everyone to this Regulatory and Compliance Committee meeting. Bear with me while I get used to talking to the room and not the screen in front of me. I'll kick us off with a karakia. Kia hura, te marino, kia whakapapa paunamu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou katoa. Hui tai ki. Okay, so apologies this morning. We've had officially from Councillor Smith and Mayor John Carter. And we've got Councillor Research teasing in with us this morning. But otherwise, welcome everybody. Good morning to our new CEO, Blair King. Welcome. And we'll just quickly do the minutes, and then I'm going to actually bring forward item 5.5. So confirmation of the previous minutes. And while I'm just letting you have a think about that, thank you, Belinda, for moving. I've just forgotten to remind everyone that our meeting is being recorded and we are live streaming. And for those joining us on the meeting via Teams, please put your hand up to speak, and Marlema will let me know whether you need to speak or not. Reminder to committee members that this picks up every sound, so no side conversations, please, when the other people up in the sky are talking. And for those joining us online, the copy of this agenda is online for you to read along with us on the FNDC website. So Belinda moved the minutes, thank you.
Happy to second.
Oh, Councillor Vucic will take him as the seconder, thank you. Any comments on the minutes? All those in favour?
Right.
Kia ora. Let's move on now to item 5.5, that the Regulatory Compliance Committee received the report building compliance update. I'll move. Second. Thank you, Councillor Collard. And we'll have Trent up to the podium to give us, he would like to.
Madam Chair, committee members, look, I don't have slides today. We, as you'll note, normally under a BCA update, I have a nice set of slides that we're all very familiar with. We're moving to do the same thing with building compliance, having the BI is now becoming apparent for the building compliance function, which is the TA function of council. So probably by the next, I'm hoping by the next update, we should have a nice set of slides that look very familiar to you. I will. Can I tease in from here with something? Is that?
Just make sure you're muted or it'll scream at you. Turn off the sound and chambers on your device so that not mute them, but make sure your sound is down. Otherwise it'll squeal.
I can see that okay.
Yeah, and we've got that in our report, but this is more current.
Yeah, this is the most current. This is our new BI. I think when I last updated the BCA, I introduced this new BI, which is a little bit different than the last one. Part of this now, we have the BCOM function, which is this one here. You'll note in the report there's two kinds of depictions. One is that of our pathway system, which is simply a dashboard showing us where we're at. I believe I have BWAFs and notice to fixes and swimming pools in there. Let you know the current state of those. We use that to manage the business. And then there was another slide there that looks exactly the same as this, except for in the red we had 70. That was a combination of overdue or data errors within the system. We've reduced that down to 22. We use this to manage our exemptions and certificate of acceptances. So at the moment, I believe we have currently sitting at about 61 COAs and exemptions combined for those. If I move back to the report. We are currently tracking at about 75% completed the work program for MB in regards to the BWAS and the audit they did on our function, the building compliance function, so that's tracking nicely. We have had a few hold-ups obviously with COVID and the likes. That slowed us down. We're feeling the effects of that on the staff at the moment, which is making a few challenges for us. Our pass rate on swimming pools is sitting at 59%. We're up to date as far as swimming pool inspections go on a triennial basis. Notice to fixes are tracking well with 142 notices issued this year compared to 200 for the same period last year. That's about it really. The report holds all the information. Do I have any questions on the report itself?
Thank you, Trent. I've got a question from Councillor Fuller.
Yeah, in terms of the executive summary on page 48, in terms of events, and first of all, I do is declare a vested interest in this. This is not a question from me. It's from another event organiser. What is the position with event fees paid when there has been cancellation due to COVID? Have they got, those people got any recourse in terms of those costs? Maybe it would be licensing or whatever it happens to be.
I mean, the only thing we control in that instance, and I can think about, I think it's the Snapper Classic up north is probably the one that comes to mind, is the only fee on that is the exemption fee itself, which I think is about $176 or something like that. Once it's issued, like we've done the work on it. I guess we haven't been asked whether we return that fee at this stage, so it's something we'd have to look into. As to other fees relating to events, I'm not sure what they would be. We only handle the building side of things. So.
Thank you, Trent. Perhaps Rochelle can add some.
Morena, through the chair, for special licences for alcohol, they usually aren't refunded. However, due to COVID, if it's COVID related, we've had to cancel those. We have been refunding those.
Is that a refund as a request, or is it just carried over as a post payment?
If they request.
Oh, yeah. So I can let them know just to get in touch.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I have Anne Court.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do appreciate that Trent is in a hurry to get back to the office because we are really under the pump. It was two observations, Madam Chair, in relation to what I think is missing from this report that I think that this committee needs to have their eyes on moving forward. We received a presentation last week from Brad Olson, the economist, and was last week, and he talked about what's driving the economy in Northland, and the far north was an outlier in terms of non-compliant consents. So we were at like 600% compared to Northland, which was at 68%, and the rest of New Zealand, which was at in single digits. And I'm making that up off the top of my head because I can't remember the exact figures, but it was huge. And it got me thinking about what's driving the significant variation for the far north. And I asked that question, and he went away and came back to us with an email, and he's broken it all down, and there's some significant commercial development and significant government spending that's driving why the far north is such a significant outlier. And then when I drive through areas like Waipapa, and I just see big shed after big shed after big shed under construction, I'm sitting there thinking, we don't know about all the significant development that are happening in our district, and we don't know about the cumulative impact of all of those significant developments on our district and how they link to infrastructure and how they link to spatial planning and whether we've got enough roading or whether we've got enough water, whether we've got enough storage. So I'm wondering if this report could be expanded, and I'm really mindful that you just simply don't have the time right now. So we could start to see significant developments that might have a material impact on something else in this organisation that as governors we need to know about and be thinking about and starting to plan for. And when I think about Waipapa, I spoke to our previous chief executive about the cumulative impact of stormwater by covering virtually every available orchard now in a commercial building. So who's got a collective eye on stormwater? I'm not sure that we have. So some feedback on that would be great. The second thing that I'm thinking we're missing, Madam Chair, is, and Trent and I have had a wee chat this morning, is significant changes to the Building Act that are driving affordability challenges. At the moment, we've been tasked with helping the government deliver their social housing agenda, and we are yet to receive a paper and deliberate on the Betterment Fund. But we've talked about two things this morning that Trent's very aware of that are going to drive significant increases in the cost of building that potentially are not warranted in the far north because we don't live in Invercargill where it's cold or in Taupo where it snows, and whether we have an advocacy role as elected members in saying to the Crown, we actually need a Northland solution for this that isn't going to make the cost of housing more expensive. Certainly Trent had some views, and I'm throwing you under the bus here with our live streaming, that the government is very open to be lobbied by the insurance sector, for example, and other sectors, but who's equally lobbying the government on behalf of the social housing providers and the Joe average citizen in the street who simply cannot afford to build a house? So there's just a couple of things there that some feedback. Thank you.
Through the chair, I guess I have to concentrate what's within my realm to provide, and I think in its simplest form I would hope when we've issued these consents for these large developments, cumulatively the planning team's looking at the effects, and that's the only reason they're allowed to be there. So I'm pretty confident we can tick that box. When it comes to being aware of those and awareness in this arena, what I can report on is and I've done it in the past, I think more in the BCA, may actually be in my end of year report, but it talks about how much commercial versus residential construction we've had in any given year, and I guess I could break down and do it monthly. That's easy enough to do. The other thing I can do is do the cost cumulatively of that commercial investment. I can provide that kind of data because that's at my fingertips, but beyond that I'm a little bit limited. I can give you a heads up on bigger projects. For example, we have I think the one you're talking about, the one that's putting the mud all over the road, is the Bunnings site in Waipapa there. That's probably one of the biggest. We have the advanced factory now that's come to a close. They're pretty close to opening. That's another big project in Waipapa. And anything else, but it all depends when it comes to light. I guess when we issue the consent is probably the time that I can report on the next available meeting on that kind of stuff, if that's okay. The rest of it, as to the lobbying and the I dare say when and I can't give you the date offhand, but when H1 comes in and the new regs around H1, which, for example, you've got to put 300 mils of insulation in your ceiling. For anyone building a flat skillion roof, that's going to be pretty difficult. What I am hoping currently, under the current legislation, we have a far north method, which is exactly what you're talking about. It gives the far north a bit of a reprieve on complying to the extent that everyone else in the country does. There may be an opportunity to provide something like that again. We'll just have to see how that pans out.
Did you wish to add anything?
Yeah, Madam Chair, just to put this report in context, this is about building compliance. So I know last time we had a resource consents conversation, there was a similar request. So we've had a chat about that, and we will endeavour to include the big project information in future reports, resource consenting and as appropriate in the building consent update, which comes next time. BCA will provide stats, but I think context is important. So if we can include, as Trent says, any information on growth and drivers of growth, and the implications, it may be broad statements about implications for infrastructure, because we will only know that once we have the input through the resource consenting process of development within the area of benefit, outside of the area of benefit, etc. So, but that link to infrastructure is a very important one. So I think it is important that we update you as best we can, and that perhaps through the infrastructure committee, we also make the linkages the other way through growth of infrastructure and infrastructure availability for growth, and make the link back to what that means for resource consents of building. So that's a conversation we will have and provide in future reports.
Did you wish to add to that?
I just write a reply, Madam Chair. First thing, I think about Kaitaia, and I think about the fact that huge development was consented at the northern end of Kaitaia, and that's created problems for this council with the provision of infrastructure, with the provision of walking and cycling, with the provision of roading, with managing speed limits, and it's left us with stranded assets in the CBD. We've got that replicating itself around the district. I think we need to be ahead of the game here. We need to have eyes on what is happening in the district and capture that within this organisation somehow. And it might not be in this report, but this is the only opportunity I've got to raise it. The second thing is, please don't anyone underestimate the power of local government New Zealand and the councillors in this room to lobby and advocate for the things that people need. So once the Building Act is changed, it's very difficult to unchange it. But if we're hearing now that it's going to change, and the government is looking to introduce new legislation, such as thermal brakes and aluminium joinery, which will add a huge cost to homeowners, we have the opportunity now to do something about that, if we know about it. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The conversation on this report is not finished yet. We've got Councillor Vesich and Blair. Did you wish to speak as well? Are you happy to wait till Councillor Vesich? Thank you. John?
Yeah, just thank you, Trent. And just in a response to, can you hear me okay, Councillor Court?
Yes.
Great. Just there are some groups. I actually spent all day yesterday, as it so happens, talking to housing initiatives that coming out of Palmerston North, and they're addressing just this problem in terms of affordable homes. The comment that came out of that, just out of interest, was that when asked why won't you lobby government, they said, well, we have large groups in the social housing that are doing that for us, such as Salvation Army and New Zealand Housing Foundation. So satisfied that that's been heard. But in saying that, I think council can put its spoke in there, and through LGNZ, as you said, Council Court, that they, through that too can do it. But we've got to get do our homework and have some hard facts on the ground. In terms of overall growth, in terms of how you manage all of that, I don't think it's his job in his report that he's doing, which I think is okay. That should be coming out of what we're doing in our long-term planning and zoning and our policies. That's how we actually manage that, get ahead of the game, and that's what we should be doing right throughout the region. Otherwise, it just becomes uncontrolled and it'll be spreading everywhere. So we maybe need to look at our planning and revise that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vesich. Blair?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's probably picking up the theme that the Deputy Mayor was raising, and I think there's a very good point. At the start, we mentioned the business intelligence tool, but we're not using business intelligence to inform. If the consent's been lodged, the impact's already done and we're dealing with it too late. The BI tool is capable of linking with our GIS so that we see an indicative layer. This is a proposed development. And then cumulatively through that BI tool, you can also work out, so a Bunnings going into an area, we know some of the impacts from that, but I guarantee very shortly after there's other issues that will come out with it in terms of the Northern Transport Alliance wanting to know about footpaths and other sort of issues. So while we're getting an input, what I'm looking at is the report itself also doesn't pick up a common theme which is coming through, how long it takes us to process, or what are the things. It's generally a question of how quickly we deal with our compliance type activities where we control that rate of development. So I'd like at some stage, through you, Madam Chair, whether you could pick one or two members of this committee to basically be a conduit from myself through Dr. Dan Myberg and Emma and our IT team to start linking up the work that Darren's team is doing, the strategy, for this year, so that we get a better layer and we start linking this information together, because it seems incredible that this theme is there. You've had some amazing developments, but we're still actually dealing with growth questions and the impacts of stranded assets, as you set up in Kaitaia. So if that is an option, I would appreciate a couple of names, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I just want to remind everyone that at the June meeting we have got a more comprehensive report, which does, like one of the things is legislation change, growth, what else? What you just said, Blair, is in that next report in June, and a whole number of other things, but I can see that there is a gap between strategy and policy, so yeah. Dean, do you want?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think just to pick up on the Chief Executive's point, that integrated approach, or the lack of, because that's what we're looking at here, is something that we will address with Darren and with Andy Finch, because I think the strategy and the policy sits at one level, and we're dealing with social housing and all kinds of other drivers that come into the mix from a macro strategic perspective.
Yeah.
So there's a policy component to that, and then we also have a very strong infrastructure component. So we need a multidisciplinary cross-organisation view of that, and I think that's what Blair was referring to there. So with some elected member involvement and oversight to provide that, and whether that comes through this committee only, or whether it also comes through the strategy and policy committee, and also comes through the infrastructure committee as appropriate, I think will be a question for us to work through. Because what Trent is sharing with us today is purely statistical information on how the building compliance aspects are tracking. The issues we're discussing here are at another level, and I think the linkage across is the important challenge for us to face.
I was going to just see if anybody was interested in putting their names forward now.
Madam Chair, Councillor Smith's just come up on the chat, so clearly she is in the meeting. And she said I'm happy to put my hand up as chair.
Just if I could add to that, Madam Chair, what Dr. Dean Myberg is saying is correct. Why I'd like two from here is that when I meet with the infrastructure committee, I'll be asking for two there and two. Otherwise, it just gets unwieldy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you want to put your name up for that?
Yeah. I'm happy to put my name up as the one that started the carnage this morning.
The train wreck.
And a couple from strategy and policy.
Yes, but it's a group that can ensure that these information, these touch points that Dan's talking about, actually link across, and we have it so that we're not talking about stats. I'm actually not so much interested in that, but there's the compliance of what we're looking at. What are the impacts?
Horizon.
Yep.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Trent. We will move that report.
Yes.
All received. Right. Item 5.1, noise control and parking enforcement update. I'll move that the Regulatory Compliance Committee receive the report, noise control and parking enforcement update. Can I have a second, please? Thank you, Councillor Ford. And we are in your hands. Rochelle, did you have slides today for this one or just speak to it?
Madam Chair, yes, I do.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Just 1 minute, thanks. And I'd just like to say that I really appreciate the slides because this regulatory and compliance is something that can get a little bit boring for some people, but I think for the benefit of governance, making sure they're keeping good track of it. I'm not bored with it ever. I love this stuff, but I think the slides help. And it helps the public as well, especially with the pictures. Thank you, Rochelle.
Morena, so I take it that the report has read, so these slides are just a summary. So for noise response, First Security is the current responder for noise complaints within the district. The contract is on extension currently and it's awaiting service delivery report. The current contract includes noise, building security, alarm monitoring and cash collection. And we certainly see the benefits in separating the noise contract out. So there are synergies between noise control and security services, so support doing these new contracts together. And First Security is committed to make improvements and provide a better service. So there have been, since the last report, so between 1st of September and 31st of March, there has been a total of 702 RFS received. This is 111 less complaints for the same time last year, and this is most likely due to the COVID restrictions with gatherings and everything like that. The response time. So the current KPI performance measure for council's level of service is 95% within the set time. There's been a gradual improvement in rural response times, which is 2 hours, with a percentage average sitting at around 87%. That was the average received between September and end of March. Urban responses are still remaining lower for the same period, with an average of 77%. Police resourcing at times is playing a big part in being able to meet these response times. Police are required to be present when seizures occur or to actually go on to some of the properties that the First Security are having to deal with. And so if police aren't able to be there within that certain time, that means that the response times are going over. And currently urban and rural, and also, although it's not currently in their coastal, is at times impossible for them to actually do the travel time and actually get to that response within those times. So that's certainly something that needs to be looked at.
Madam Chair, if I may comment, there's two things there. One is the contract, which is coming up for review. Yep. So we need to have those conversations about contractual performance indicators or KPIs. And then the setting of the KPI itself. And as Rochelle has just said, some parts of this district are out of reach, if you like, within a 2-hour time frame. And that could be, it could be a number of reasons for that. The resourcing by the contractor and their ability to reach and send people out. Mm-hmm. And then the police obviously escorting. So there's two aspects. One is the contract and the other is the setting of the KPI itself, which we will take a closer look at. The last thing we want to do is set KPIs that are not achievable, because then we just set ourselves up to fail and we report, the percentages that we report. And interesting that the urban and the rural are different, and that rural is, I was expecting the other way around, that urban was in fact going to be a better performing area than because of the shorter distances, but in fact rural is performing a lot better than urban. So yeah, those are things that we will address.
The urban is a lot higher than what rural are. There's very, well, in comparison, is probably about 1/10 of the number per month in urban. But there's also issues such as Russell, which would be considered urban. However, it's dependent on travelling, whether the ferries are actually running at the time, whether they actually have to go right around to respond. So those are certainly things that need to be looked at.
Before you move off noise control, we'll take some questions on that if anybody has noise control questions. Yes, Belinda first then. Thank you, Belinda.
Yeah, thank you for that. Always an ongoing challenge in my area, but I'm happy to say I've had far fewer complaints, and I think a lot of that is due to the changing environment and COVID issues as well. One thing that has always bugged me over the years is the fact that the areas are not mapped. So when we're looking at our urban and rural, you know, for example, the likes of Parurua Wātea is actually rural when it comes to postal and you know, Wi-Fi and things like that. So I'd be really interested to see some sort of consistency somewhere across what is urban and what is rural. And I've always been challenged by the fact that you don't have to have a trained ear to determine what noise is. It's just baffling. But anyway, I think on a challenging perspective, I mean, not having the police available in order to follow through for the contractors to actually do their job thoroughly is a real challenge for us. Bearing in mind, I know that some of the police stations are not manned. So that's a problem in itself, to be able to actually act efficiently, really, to you know, mitigate the problem if they can't act without a policeman. That's a real issue. And the other thing, on page 23, the action taken, in the breakdown there, it would be really helpful to see what that breakdown, or what areas they are, whether they're urban and rural, and actually where they are, because sometimes we perceive that the most complaints come from our area, and in actual fact they don't. And we are seeing some changing trends across the district generally. So I'd be quite interested to see, like, where were those verbal warnings of 166? You know, they used to all be in Kingsbury and Pai here. Maybe they're all now in the main street in Kaikoai. It would be really interesting for us when we're looking at, particularly if we're coming up to that contract being reviewed. I'd be interested to see a little bit more level of detail. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Similar comments. I noted on page 19 there is no definition between rural and urban, and I wondered if this is something that could be picked up on as part of the section 17A review, that will start to map that. And the second thing is, I was interested in the comment at the bottom of page 20 where it says, if a noise control officer is called out to investigate noise, they will determine if the noise is reasonable and within permissible levels. It is not necessary to use monitoring equipment. And the comment I've written on the side here is time plays a significant role here. So if you've been, and we're all aware of cases where the noise has been going on for 8 hours or more, and you're at the end of your tether, and you call the noise control officer, he arrives for a split second in time, he gets out of his vehicle and says, well, that seems fine to me, and drives off. You may or may not issue a verbal warning. It doesn't factor in time. So my question, Rochelle, is there a way to capture time as part of section 17A review, so we can capture just how debilitating that becomes to the person that's followed? Thank you.
Through the chair, yes, that can certainly be something that we look through under the section 17A report. It is a difficult one because often by the time that the response gets there, noise may have stopped, even though it may have been going for 4 hours before someone's actually reported it. And then by the time that the response gets there, it can sometimes stop, but then can start again once they leave. And it is very, very difficult because they can only really go on what they hear and see at the time. has been in the past where complaints have been received and for some reason they are tipped off that the responders are on the way, and so it all goes quiet, and then it turns up again. So it is a difficult one, and so it's very important as well when the caller gives that information to when they're putting in the RFS for the thing, to say that it's actually been going for that period of time. And I think that's something that really does need to be involved in, because then the responders can actually go and talk to the people and say, we're aware that this has been happening for this period of time, and we have got complaints through them. It's also important for the members of the public making the complaints to, and I know it's quite tedious for them, but to make a further complaint if this is continuing.
Councillor Collard?
Yeah, I say this without knowing what the answer is. We've had a number of calls just of recent times in terms of noise created by cars doing wheelies around town streets after dark. Obviously, when you call, they're gone. All that's left is the black stuff on the road where they've been doing their wheelies, and people being uncertain as to where to go with that, because if you call the coppers, they don't show up for an hour or so, and definitely even the rubber's cold by then. But yeah, is there an answer?
Through the chair, I think with vehicles and wheelies in streets, that is a police matter in the first initial, because it is a danger to the public at the time. The noise, unfortunately, is part of that. Again, by the time the response gets there, everything's probably has gone.
Definitely only temporary in each area.
Thank you, Councillor Collard. I'd just like to add, I've written down Russell, and my question or comment, when we're looking at the contract and the KPIs, Russell has, in the past, they've had this is probably going back 3 to 6 years ago, they had the security person in town, so they had really effective noise control, and it was really, that's the performance level that they expect, but they have not had that for the last 4 or 5 years. It's been, and it impacts on the liquor licensing situation there as well. I mean, we saw that with one of the businesses there. So when we're looking at that contract and KPIs, it's not one fit for one town. We need to make sure that we take in the context of the challenge that Russell has. Even if you do use the back road, that's an hour and a half, and the event's probably over by the time the noise control officer gets there. So it would be really awesome if they had, whoever is doing the monitoring has staff in Russell. The other thing, whenever I'm hearing of any incidences of police not getting to a scene, I'm emailing Tony Hill, and I'm at the end of my tether with how long it's taking for police to respond to noise control incidences, or just on Easter weekend, it was Easter Sunday, no, it was Good Friday, it took them all day to assist a mental health patient to be admitted. So, all the hospital staff are waiting there all day managing this situation. All they need is the right police officer to come and help with that admission. It's a terrible state of policing at the moment. And so I hope that we, at a managerial, operational level, are having conversations with Tony Hill so that he can understand the pressure that his situation is putting on our situation. Yeah, they just do not have enough police, and everybody's too afraid to say so out loud, but they don't have enough police. Yeah, that's all I read. about that? Yes,
Sorry,
Belinda.
Madam Chair, to speak again, but one thing that springs to mind over the years in relation to the urban side of noise is that we don't look at our topography and all the natural amphitheatres we have. And quite often people are complaining about noise, you know, after, say, prior to 11 in the evening, when in actual fact, it's just the amphitheatre of where they live. We have so many little coves and bays, you know, and Russell and Play here, and the noise is trapped as it does rise. And it's just, I think people sometimes are just very intolerant of a bit of noise coming up, and there is no way of escaping that sound shell effect. And often maybe, I just wonder how effective our the service is on this contract as to whether we can better sort of balance those things.
Madam Chair, I think before we engage in a process of reviewing the contract and awarding a contract, it may be helpful to workshop from elected member expectations, how we set those KPIs and how we set up the contract. Because I was listening carefully to those examples, and if we have someone in Russell or if we have someone in various locations, it will add to the cost. Undoubtedly it will, and so if we find some kind of a balance of expectation of a performance level and the actual ability to deliver that, then I think we on a better footing in terms of looking ahead and then bringing reports to say yes, we are hitting the targets or we're not, because those are realities. And then also engaging with police, maybe inviting them along to engage in that workshopping discussion, because there are some real gaps there, as Rochelle was saying earlier. Regardless of noise contracts, if police support isn't available, that affects the performance, regardless of who's doing it. And if they can't assist in that way, at that level, then clearly we need to reset the KPIs accordingly.
Would be fairly consistent if we not expect the police to turn up instantly, just about on any occasion except the death.
Thank you, Councillor Collard. We'll let you carry on with the parking. Rochelle, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I use this slide again for your benefit, Councillor Court. So between 1st of September and 31st of March, again, there were 252 parking infringements issued. Again, over the time limit and in reserved disabled parking is the most common infringements. The parking warden has really noticed a significant decrease in vehicles, which is in the CBDs due to COVID, with just more people working from home or just not coming into town. So has reported that his normal beat of, say, carriers pretty much taking half the time. So it has been quite quiet, which has had the lower infringements. Also, prior to writing this report, the decision now that we have the time-free parking until the end of May to encourage people to start visiting these centres again. So, in place. So the vehicle warrant of fitness and registration trial, so it's been now 9 months into the trial. However, due to COVID, this has been less consistent than what it should have been. So from the 1st of July last year, when we started this, we did go for the 2 months of the flyer advertising that we were going to start monitoring the warrant of fitness and having a current licence. Due to COVID lockdowns in Waka Kotahi suspending WOF and Regos until the end of November 2021, the parking warden didn't start actually doing any infringements until December. And the focus was then around looking for vehicles that were over 6 months to sort of look at where the real problem was. So in that period of time, there have been 20 infringement notices for WOFs only, out-of-date WOFs, which are over 6 months, for having, and out of those 20, 6 have actually been waived. due to the owners complying with their warrant of fitnesses, which is what our aim is. And 2 infringements have actually been paid. The balance of 12, they're still in the system waiting for reminders or that time payment. State highway delegations were received from Waka Kotahi in January of this year. There's work now on the new bylaw, and the final bylaw will be presented to the Stratton Policy Committee next month for recommendation. And parking policy is also underway, which will inform the local area parking plans and provide a strategic direction of parking regulation across the district moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Rochelle. Questions?
Yeah, I had one on, Rochelle, I might have missed something back in the process, but Te Hami Flats and the problems that we had pre-COVID with people, an individual person living in a caravan and people overnight camping and the impact on that area for freedom camping. I noticed that area is not included in the tipping area at all. Is it a totally separate issue? Is it able to be, are people able to be moved on and prosecuted legally, or are we still in that no man's land of people parking on the beachfront on the road reserve here along from the bridge to, I think it's 50k zone in that area?
It's 80k, so it's NZTA, and we were seeking the delegation for it, but
through the chair.
Yeah.
So the delegations that we have received are based really on what our parking warden can look at this time. And within the report I have, and I've also got Brian Mackin on the line as well to answer any of the bylaw questions in the policy. But we certainly can add to those delegations. Once we've received these delegations, obviously we can put them into the new bylaw, but there's also within this new policy, there's the opportunity for community boards to have their input into where they believe that other delegations may be of benefit to the community, and those can be included, and we can go back to Waka Kotahi and add to those delegations or remove delegations from there.
So it's mainly the walking area and the CBD that this is addressing and along the main area. Yeah.
Madam Chair, we have one parking warden, and so it's really looking at what, with the resources that we have got at the moment, adding those state highway delegations to allow for those resources. If we were going to add more, and they were quite significant, then we would, there's always that expectation once we do have the delegation that those are enforced, and so we would then need to look at resourcing on whether or not we could enforce more areas than what we've already currently got.
And just on a positive note, I think it's great that people did thank us for reminding them that their regos and warrants were out of date. I think that's a positive thing. I'm guilty of driving around sometimes for quite some time without renewing my warrant of fitness or whatever. So just to get reminders, it's a bit of a bugbear. And the other issue, was not an issue. The other thing I was pleased to see is that Kirikiri now has more of a parking problem than Paihia.
Councillor Court? I'm not quite sure whether it's a good thing. Just a question of clarification, Rochelle. Is it correct that any warranted officer can issue a ticket, or only the parking officer?
Madam Chair, if a monitoring officer is warranted under the Land Transport Act, they can issue parking tickets.
Do we have any of those?
Yes, we do.
Madam Chair, through you, I think it is a matter of workloads, because the multi-warranting of officers has been a discussion ever since I've been with this council. The challenge is they are the eyes and ears, they're out there, and it makes sense that they then also are warranted to do the infringements. But we are finding that the workloads don't always allow for that. So I think the fact that we are limited in our parking enforcement capability is something that we will need to address and bring back to the committee and work with recommendations through the CEO. On principle of revenue generated, not necessarily through parking infringements or the parking area, if we are able to then channel excess revenue to fund these areas like parking, I think there may be a solution there. That does come back to how we set fees and charges in other areas of council, but I think there's an option there to fund operations like parking from elsewhere.
Ancillary question, your acting chair.
I
I've got an ancillary question to that, and that is particularly in relation to people parking in disabled spots in the CBD. We observed that a lot. You'll be aware when we did our LTP consultation and we were set up in Kiri that day next to the disability spot. It was just constantly being used by able-bodied drivers, so I'd be encouraging any warranted officer who saw able-bodied people parked in a disabled spot to be issuing a fine, or at least giving them a warning. I'm not so much worried about all of the other parking infringements. It's just, that one is just so insensitive that I just think it boils my belly, that one. Thanks.
Probably my question was fairly similar to Councillor Court, in that looking at the comment in terms of parking enforcement, people parking in areas reserved for disabled persons without a permit also requires ongoing monitoring. Does that mean that we haven't currently ticketed anybody in terms of parking in those areas, and it needs to be focused on, or not?
We do issue a number of infringements for disabled car parking. They're one of the highest infringements that we do issue. It's having one parking warden being actually able to be watching that disabled car park at all times. Often it can be for a short period of time that people do pop in and everything like that. So there's certainly other options perhaps that can be looked at in the future, whether or not those have got cameras where it's clearly advised to people parking that you know, if we can receive a clear picture, date timed and stamped, showing clearly that a car hasn't got a disabled car park sticker and things like that, then you know, that is something that, you know, other councils are looking at, where they have got cameras and things like that. But it's certainly a focus for the parking warden to keep a close eye on the disabled car parks in the region.
Can I add to that, Madam Chair? So I had a quick chat with the parking warden, one of the things that you tend to do, on such matters. And the biggest challenge that they have is the public reaction when they go to deal with such an offence. Typically the person is still either in their car or nearby and gives a very adverse reaction to the allegation. So what Rochelle's doing about cameras, some councils have actually put a camera up as part of the CCTV to make it quite clear. They give the people an opportunity to write in and contest, because there are times when the parking permit is not clearly visible. But where you have one parking officer, they have to basically use their discretion as to whether that, sometimes it is just, hey mate, you're parking there. But it's also one of those that other staff at times can also go there, because one of the joys of delegations they always cascade upwards. So it is a reminder that we can put out to general staff that are warranted, that there's nothing actually stopping them giving that advice saying, hey, there, because when it's one person it gets very awkward when it's wider. So yes, take your point on board.
Thank you for that. at the Disability Action Group meeting, it is something that comes up often, and I have to remind members at those meetings that our parking warden can only enforce our parking spaces, and there are a number of disability car parks and supermarkets that we can't enforce, but there is an app, and I cannot find it right now, but there is an app that the disability community are reporting infringements through, so I'll write that down as a, oh, I've taken my pencil. And I'll send that app out, and we'll maybe publicise it on our website. Oh yes, so just coming back to the delegations for state highways, a couple of the other communities that were mentioned during workshopping was Okanoni, in particular around the hall and the boat ramp, and Moerewa. There's a couple of shops that are impacted by all-day parkers, and if the cars could turn over, then the cafe, for example, would be able to have better sales. But I do understand that we need to have a conversation around resourcing. Yeah, so when can we have that? Not this annual plan, the next one?
I think, Madam Chair, if I may, it's a case of looking at all of these delegations that we receive from, we get all of the areas mapped and delegations assigned, and then I think it's a question of looking at how we resource that. Because it's a discussion we've had with Darren and his team, every bylaw that is passed by council needs monitoring.
Yes.
And there's an enforcement element to that. And that relates to everything, not just parking. So there is a question ongoing of, yes, it's good to have the bylaw, but what is our ability to enforce it? And I think if we do a bigger picture assessment of how are we placed as a council to enforce in a more general sense, I think that might be helpful. So parking as one area of focus, but then also the monitoring, and then multiple areas of non-compliance across the district. And I think it would be helpful, I would have thought, to look at the bigger picture and then present that and workshop that with elected members as we work our way through. And it will have to be a snapshot at a point in time of we have X number of bylaws, what is our ability to actually enforce those or not, and look at the big picture, and then present that to you and maybe workshop that, because there will be a resourcing question at the end of it.
Yes, Rochelle.
Madam Chair, just to add to that, the parts of the district that you have mentioned, we need to also look at what method of enforcement would be the best in those areas, whether it be cameras or, a parking warden. He loves his job, he's great at his job, and he's a great presence within the community. And I think that's really important to continue. But for these outlying areas that we may not be able to get to, for example, Okanoni, where we, to travel there and travel back is, half a day gone, and it may be no one parking there at the time, and it's likely that it's local people that are doing it. So it's really around the education messaging that we're putting out there, as well as potentially some cameras to deter that behaviour.
Yeah.
Chair, can I ask Rochelle if it's possible to warrant Māori buildings in some of these areas, like we need to do that for it?
Madam Chair, I'd have to look into that. There is a health and safety aspect of warranting, for example, like with dog ranges, you can warrant dog ranges within the Dog Control Act, which aren't necessarily employed by council. They can be volunteers and everything like that. But the health and safety aspect of that would need to be looked into, and whether or not it's such a risk to council where, you know, for a dog ranger, if they get bitten or anything like that, who it falls back to. And I guess also in issuing infringements could have that, you know, I know with our own parking warden has been, you know, abused and physically and verbally. So we're sort of putting a lot of health and safety measures in place for his protection, such as front-facing cameras and things like that. So there would be a big health and safety aspect there.
It is a really good question though, and because and I've heard it raised in some of the you know, some of my Māori forums that I'm in. They would love to do ticketing, but the money come to the group. Yeah, so maybe in the future we might see something like that.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Claire.
So yes, you can appoint others, no different to us appointing for security or others to do parking wardens. You can appoint a group. The challenge is the revenue always goes back to the parent authority. It's never going to go back to the contractors. But there is the ability council on the, when you look at the registration ones, I think it's 50% is a proportion we get as of right. But it would be talking to those other parties if they were going to do it, as the manager has pointed out. How do you ensure that they're trained? Because the requirement to prosecute or follow through sits with the parent organisation being council. And so it'd be very much on Dean to then resource up that. And the cost of that would make it, I mean, at the moment, I think you're looking at about $1,000. Was it 1,000 a month or 1,000 a week? We will in terms of that dollars that Janice pointed out if we went to free parking. Total revenue, 1,000 a week, month. 1,000 a month. So it's not a revenue earner. We could issue more fines, but equally is that it's picking which of those areas that are the greatest outcome that council wants. Thank you.
Madam Chair, one just thought that's come to mind is there's been quite a lot of discussion about placemaking around the district, and I think with clever design, a lot of parking issues can be addressed in terms of pedestrian walkways, non-access to vehicles, etc., etc. In fact, well, it could go the other way, it could create problems, but provided there's adequate parking or adequate alternative parking, I think placemaking can go some way towards addressing some of the parking issues in some parts of the district. So it's something else we can look at.
I think that our district lends itself to having some out-of-the-box solutions. We're so geographically challenged. And you mentioned the Māori wardens. They're already in legislation where the police officer are allowed to close a road, you know, so that they've got organisation behind them that can support them in this space. Who knows whether they would want to do this type of thing anyway, though. But where does that sit? You know, does it sit with us to go and come back and make a workshop and discuss what was the other thing? So there's how it could be done, you know, with what resource, and the other question was
legal jurisdiction.
Yep, legal jurisdiction and cameras. So it would be really cool if we got a report back on that, perhaps. Yes, Belinda, you want to?
I just have really a comment, Madam Chair. I read a few years ago about an electronic device that was actually
oh yeah, they've got them
put in the
Christchurch.
seal. I was going to say Palmerston North. I don't know why. I think the
Yes.
article
It's on the
where that would actually do away with parking meters and with the wardens. So you'd only need the signage, and it was an automated feedback and an electronic ticket. And I just wonder over time, maybe for the next LTP process, whether or not we ought to be, because of our challenged, you know, geographical areas, and the fact our seasonality as well plays a huge impact on our offending and our ability to actually, you know, achieve good revenue from the service and then make it effective. I just wonder whether perhaps in that workshop we could look at what's out there, what's being used in other areas, and are they just city centric, or perhaps with time it might be affordable for us to turn to something like that. in certain areas that we, especially those outreach areas. So just, we'll workshop it. I'll try and remember where I read it.
Thank you, Belinda. I'll talk to Dean about how we're going to get the answers to all those questions in the future offline. No more further questions on item 5.1? All those in favour of receiving this report? Aye. Okay, item 5.2, Animal Shelter Update. That the Regulatory Compliance Committee received the report Animal Shelter Update. A mover and a seconder? Linda and Anne-Paul, thank you. Rochelle, did you wish to speak to this one as well, or just take questions?
Madam Chair, I do have a couple of slides.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Apologies, Madam Chair. Rochelle, did you send that to me as well?
It's in the same one.
One moment, please.
It's, yeah, the PowerPoint just rolls on. So it's just after the last parking one.
Okay, let me bring that up.
So I do take it that the report has been read. So this is just a concept drawing of the Southern Animal Shelter for Kaikohe. So currently we're progressing negotiations with the tenderer and hoping to award a contract in mid-June, and looking for an extension for build to March next year, which MB may have agreed to in principle. And the Northern Animal Shelter, so that's been operational now since the 1st of August, and it's our sole shelter that we are working with currently. So between 1st of August, when it became the sole shelter, up until the end of March, there have been 198 dogs impounded, 34 dogs adopted, and 20 dogs to rescue groups, and 69 dogs euthanized at the shelter. So.
Yes.
I have a question, and it relates to the Kaikohe facility, and it's relating to the budget. When I read the report, I was minded of the time where all the elected members were put in a bus and driven out to Malcolm Kennel, and we were sold on buying it because it was an existing dog pound, and while the structures needed work to make them meet the Health and Safety and the Animal Welfare Act, it had a house, it had a resource consent, there were some challenges with the road that we needed to address, but we were buying a going concern. And then when I read through the report on pages 38 and 39, I thought the only thing that's left of the going concern is the resource consent. Everything else is gone. The house, which we were going to hand over to the animal control officers, all the trees, all the fencing, even down to the demolition and removal of the septic tank. So I thought, crikey, if we'd known that we were going to have to demolish everything, would we have bought this site? Probably not, but it is what it is. And then I got to thinking, have we got enough money left to do what we wanted to do with all of these other unexpected costs that we've run up against? Or are we making compromises? That's my question. Do we have enough money?
Through the chair, obviously the tenderer process is still currently under negotiation, so I can't really comment on how much money is left. With the PGF funding that we received, that did enable us to build 2 new shelters. So until that tender negotiation is over, I'm unable to comment on sort of what budget there is. Having been involved in the design and build of the shelter, there's very little that we can compromise on. We've kept it to be as is efficient and meeting all the standards that we need and everything like that. So we're certainly not cutting corners, but we're not going over the top in any design. But just to add to these are shelters that would last, for sort of 30, 50 years. So they are, well built.
Ancillary question, Madam Chair. So we did purchase a piece of land at NASA for the purposes of building this facility, which we've sold. What's happened to that budget?
Through the chair, that budget went back to the shelter build, I understand.
So it's in here, it's captured in here?
Within the report or within the
No, it's not
the
in
build?
report.
No.
Madam Chair, if I may, that question went to the Chief Financial Officer, and she's confirmed that that budget is available to put back into the project. So the committee may remember that there was a discussion at the annual plan workshop where a number of capital projects were listed and showing budgets that were going over due to inflationary effects of just cost of materials and things like that, and shortages out in the marketplace. So what Rochelle is referring to is a figure that has been put up that is in excess of the budget, but that negotiation process is underway to see what can be compromised on in some way or done differently at a cheaper cost. And the figure you saw at the annual plan workshop was not inclusive of the 125,000 from the NAFA site. So that will be put against the project and obviously reduce the amount that may be required in the final costing and award of contract.
Thank you, Dr. Dean. Madam Chair, my final comment is, and I'm not saying this to be critical, but as an elected member, I was put on a bus and taken out and shown an existing facility and told that we could buy this, and with minimal cost we could transform this into a fit-for-purpose dog shelter. Now, reading this report and the reports that have preceded it, none of it was fit for purpose. We've had to demolish everything on site. Asbestos was discovered. We've had to remove asbestos. There's a whole bunch of things that have said to me, perhaps this wasn't your finest hour, Anne, and perhaps you should ask some more questions right at the get-go. So moving forward, what are the lessons learned that we can make sure that there's no unintended consequences or surprises coming at us if we're in this boat again? I don't have the answer to that today. I just put that out there that I don't think in hindsight, if we had known we were going to have to completely turn that site to virgin ground, we would have gone with that site. So moving forward, if we're doing other big builds in the future, what's the process for making sure that we really have considered all these things at the decision-making point? Just an observation, thank you.
Madam Chair, the Deputy Mayor makes a very good point. A lot of unknowns at the time, and no excuses there. We had the opportunity through the additional $1 million that was assigned to us, and we thought we could build 2 animal shelters, and also make some changes. The original concept was for an education centre, so what's in that design picture there is a little different from what we've built up north. So the concept was that we would provide some educational programs, etc., as well as run a facility, and the whole rehoming focus, etc., etc. But the point is well made around the original intent, and this precedes Rochelle, so I'm probably the best person to speak to this. Is that we would have converted what was there, but clearly that wasn't possible. A lot of new information came subsequently, which suggested that with additional funding from government, that we would be better placed to build a brand new facility on site. So, yes.
Thank you. Probably slightly contrary view on this whole process. you know, when I became an elected member, the council of the day were looking for a site to build a new animal shelter for a very long time, and had already had consent issues with proposed sites. So despite us buying this, I mean, when we were there, a dog got out under the fence. So it wasn't fit for the type of dogs that we were going to be having. That was a prime location for caring for dogs that are loved and, you know, looked after and nurtured, but it wasn't a site, and, you know, even the concrete one that we walked in, that it wouldn't have stood up to our, you know, the legislation that we now have to comply with for cleanliness and keeping our staff safe, and the size of the kennel that they have to be in. So yeah, I can totally understand why we needed to gut it. I was disappointed about the house saga, but I've moved on, and I'm really hopeful that we can get this done, you know, in the next construction season, because how many animal control officers have we got at the moment, and they have to transport the dogs all the way up to Kaitaia, which is a great facility, but it's a long way to drive, especially if you are picking up the dog, you know, out on the east coast. If you're, you know, collecting a dog out in Rafferty and have to drive all the way to Kaitaia, that's on the, yeah, it's a long trek. One of the questions that I had on this report is, we talk about the euthanasia rates and the rescue and rehoming rate, and it's really awesome that we've got the rehoming ourselves. We're doing that, and we're working with the rescues, but are we capturing all the numbers for the rescues? There's possibly a gap. Do you know what I mean there, reading between the lines?
Madam Chair, sorry, no, I don't. I'm quite comfortable that the adoption rates and rescue numbers are correct.
Yeah.
The adoption rates are through our council webpage, and those are on par to be as high as what we did have with the two shelters, you know, coming towards the end of the year. And the rescue group, one in particular, does assist us with the rescues.
Yes. How many rescue groups are we working with?
Just the one.
Oh, okay. What I'm referring to is on Facebook, you see lots of dogs lost, strayed, and the narrative from the public is, no, don't, you've already rang the pound. No, don't ring the pound. Hang on, here's, you know, ring the rescue. And so the rescue gets there first, but it has been reported. So do we have a statistic on unreported, you know, reported but not action?
Madam Chair, no, I understand where you're coming from now.
Yeah.
No, the stats that I've reported on are solely for impounded dogs that have entered our facility. So what has become of ones that don't make it to our shelter, I'm unsure of that number.
Yeah, be interesting to see what that number is. Belinda?
Just to note, following on from that, Madam Chair, also on social media there are a number of happy stories of people rehoming dogs themselves on social media when they have to shift or a tenancy or they sell their home and can't take the dog. So I think people are becoming more responsible, and it's good to see people taking initiative.
Madam Chair, the euthanised figure may be of concern to some. I have to say that there's an assessment done on each and every dog that comes to our facilities or facility, and we would not rehome a dog that is unsuitable for rehoming. And that behaviour is assessed, and our animal management team do that as a matter of course, and I think the euthanised figure, while it may seem high, none of those dogs were suitable for rehoming, and all we would be doing in effect would be transferring a problem into the community where there would be further dog attacks on people or on other dogs. So that's something we're very mindful of, and that would explain, the figure for one. It's not that we don't have the accommodation or arrangements to deal with the number of dogs coming through.
Awesome. Thank you. No further questions. All those in favour?
Aye.
Item 5.3, the FNDC Dog Management Bylaw 2018. And the resolution is that the Regulatory Compliance Committee received the report FNDC Dog Management Bylaw 2018. And I'll have a mover. Was that you, Anne? Did you move it? Yeah. Councillor Collard, thank you. And this report has come about partly in response to the deputation we received at our last meeting. It covers off the question of when can we deliver or when can we renew the bylaw. How effective is it? Rochelle.
Madam Chair, I do have some, two slides that follow on, and I do have my colleague Roger online to assist with any bylaw questions. So just to summarise the report, we do have for the dog management bylaw looking around if there was any opportunity for early review of the bylaw. There are two ways that it can be triggered. That's either by a change in legislation that renders a bylaw ultra-virus or illegal, or it can be upon request by a resolution from council, from elected members for a review of the bylaw. So just looking at some figures since the bylaw came in place. So between the 1st of July 2019 and 31st of March, there have only been 4 RFS received for attacks on protected wildlife. And in particular for Taupo Bay, there's only been 3 RFS received. With bylaws, in particular on beaches, for any enforcement action to be taken for uncontrolled dogs on beaches, the alleged dog or dog owner must be clearly identified as committing an offence. And the ability for animal management officers to conduct patrols is assessed on the number of RFS that are received and our staff resourcing at the time. So with the number of beaches and reserves and parks, obviously with the number of officers that we do have, we can't be at each place at each time, but we certainly try and do patrols of these areas when resourcing allows us to. So we are reliant on members of the public to let us know of any areas which are requiring more patrolling than others, but we certainly, cannot be there 24 hours, and we cannot be at each beach or reserve at the times where dog walking is more common, such as early mornings and afternoons and evenings. So if any reports do come through from members of the public, just a long distance photo of a dog running in the distance isn't going to be helpful for us to follow up after hours. But if we certainly, if we see a dog that's clear, car registrations, things like that, we are able to follow up. So those things are really helpful where we do have members of the public. And of course we have got dog rule signs. The bylaw is very clear to all dog owners. There's dog signs at each area, but as we know with signs, there are people who choose to ignore them, even if we had multiple signs right across. And we also, have been putting out media releases coming into the busy period to remind dog owners. So it's really, around that educational approach and, being as visible as we possibly can will stop that minority who don't abide by the rules.
Thanks, Rochelle. Any questions from members? Yes,
Yeah,
Melinda?
just an observation on some of the new signs that have gone up along the beachfront. Is there only readable from the footpath. If you were a pedestrian up on the footpath, perhaps going down the steps onto the beach. So if you're walking around or along the beach, which most dog walkers do, the sign's not actually visible when you're down on the beach. I don't know whether they can be double-sided or whether they can actually put one on near the staircases that go down to the beach. But yeah, good people, nice people with their dogs are walking oblivious to the fact that they shouldn't be walking there with their dog. So, I just think we need to sort of look with a clear brain as to where we stick the signs and not assume that people walk right along the footpath and go down the stairs to get their dog on the beach. They actually walk right round backwards and forwards on the beach.
Through the chair. We do try and put the signs, try and put the signs sort of at, entry and exit points, common ones where people do come along with the dogs. But it's a good point of having them sort of facing the beach, or double-sided. We certainly can, but we do. The budget for signage is quite huge every year because of people defacing them, breaking them, taking them away, and so any areas whereby it would be beneficial to add some more. I'm very keen to hear within reason.
Yes.
I find it remarkable that someone would have a dog and not know that they have obligations. So if they were going to go to a beach, I would expect that they would make themselves familiar with what the bylaw said. So I guess for me, bylaws are there primarily as guidance to try and drive good behaviour. I know that the bylaw did not go far enough for some and went way too far for others. I don't think reviewing it will fix that, and I don't think it's been embedded long enough yet for it really to land with people. Saw some interesting posts on Facebook on the weekend about a woman who was bleeding at Tea Beach, where a dog had jumped up on her. So they put quite a graphic post on Facebook. I think it was yesterday. And you're right, Rochelle, the animal management team, we're not resorting to be at every beach, but that's not unique to us. That would be the same throughout the entire country, and I suspect throughout the entire world. So this is reliant on people doing the right thing, and the bylaw is the tool there for us, for the people that don't do the right thing. So I'm not sure if you're looking for a guidance, and that's why Roger's with us today. Hi, Roger. To say, should we be bringing this forward? I'm not sure where this sits in the triage of 100 bylaws that are currently up for review right now, and I think that that's something that would need to be considered in the amalgam of everything else that elected members want and our very limited resourcing ability. That's my 5 cents. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Darren.
I can provide some comment.
Thanks, Darren.
Thanks, Andy, through the chair. So this is one of our newer bylaws, 2018, and the review is out to 28. If we look at the bylaws that were revoked or that are in need of review, we're currently working through those. So if there was an appetite for council to have this reviewed before 2018, there would be some need for reprioritisation. Because we've heard about staffing all morning and the string only goes so far, and I'm pushing my team really hard at the minute, and Roger's delivering everything I've been asking for. So I would be remiss of me not to signal the fact that we would be slipping on other stuff if there is an appetite to review this for this year.
And Madam Chair, if I may just add, in the report that Rochelle's presented, the RFSs, there's a very low number of RFSs there, and yes, Taupo Bay, there's 3, but I'll refer to them as unsubstantiated or unsupported RFSs, which require investigation. I mean, that's resource hungry too, but the number itself is low. If we'd had multiple RFSs at Taupo Bay, for example, and it was running into double digits or higher, then I'd say, well, there may be a case to look at this. But, you know, the number is low. And the problem we do have is the council has a balancing challenge in terms of balancing the interests of what I refer to as the bird lobby, and we're all interested in achieving good conservation outcomes on the one hand, and then keeping the dog lovers happy on the other side of the spectrum. So it is a balancing act, and unless there's a problem, you know, that's emerging, and it's a major issue around numbers of RFSs escalating, etc., etc., I would support Darren in terms of prioritisation. Perhaps this one sits there, and we'll keep a close eye on it in terms of any trends that may indicate an earlier review. But for now, it is a low figure.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dean. Either of you have questions? I've got a couple. So just on the review date, and I have awful deja vu about bylaw review periods, and like for a review is, you know, not having to rewrite the whole thing, and then a new bylaw. So can we just have some clarity, Roger, on that time period? Because remember, there was a couple of staff reports and then an external report. It was all really fun. Not.
Okay, I'll do my best to give you the explanation. So under the Local Government Act, in the review period. So for this one here, in the report, which was based on a study that was done by staff on the revoked bylaws, which is in 2019. So what we did is we traced back through minutes to meetings just to make sure we had continuity. The rules are, if it's a bylaw, it's every 5 years, and if it's an existing bylaw, it needs to be reviewed every 10.
Sorry, Roger. Is it just me that can barely hear him?
No, it's breaking up.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Is Chambers muted?
So mute Chambers.
Roger, maybe I can pick up what you're saying. A new bylaw reviewed every 5 years, an existing bylaw reviewed every 10 years.
Yes.
And I spoke to George this morning, and he did confirm 10 years is the review period for this bylaw.
But isn't this considered a new bylaw? Because we created a new dog bylaw.
Yep.
No.
No, Roger's saying no.
Yeah, that's right. This is not a new bylaw.
Yep.
Just clarify, it's not a new bylaw, but if you want to make a new bylaw, you can.
Yes.
To be clear, so if the committee is saying, rather than trying to fritter around the sides of the existing bylaw, and you want to basically start anew, that would be the thing to do, and that's special consultative process.
So I understand that the dog bylaw we adopted in 2018 was a new bylaw because the previous one had expired.
No.
Oh, it's because we started the review in time.
Yes,
even
correct.
though it had expired. Right. Okay. Okay, cool. I'm not seeking to, I just need to make sure we've got that clear, because we are being challenged by the Northern Regional Council. I'm not sure if that letter was tabled. It was tabled at our meeting in the last, you don't remember seeing that letter?
I don't remember. Refresh my memory, please, Madam Chair, in case I've forgotten or I didn't see it or it hasn't been tabled.
I'll try and find it.
There was a deputation.
Yep, and it was accompanied by a letter from the Northern Regional Council.
Correct, and there was some discussion around feral dogs, as well as desire to have the bylaw reviewed.
Because of some new bird legislation coming.
Can't remember that, sorry.
I'll just find it. What's his name? Jack. Yeah. Have you seen that letter, Roger?
Yes, yes. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Probably can't hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yes, I've seen the letter. It was around feral dogs, and it was a request to review the bylaw, not based on any legalities of the bylaw, whether it's a new or an existing bylaw. It was more a case of there's changing circumstances with the situation of wildlife on beaches. So it wasn't based on any bylaw review date, based on whether it's new or a existing bylaw.
While you're looking for that letter, Madam Chair, can I ask Roger a question? Good dog owners are not our worry. Good dog owners will always be good dog owners, so I'm not concerned about that. It's the bad dog owners, and now you're raising an issue of feral dogs. Is there anything in our current bylaw that has not gone far enough to address those that would warrant a review?
Through Chair, and Roger can probably add, the bylaw is feral dogs is an unowned dog, so to speak, and the bylaw is for owned dogs. It's what it's based around is a dog having a dog owner, and those are the rules for complying. Whereas a feral dog, so to speak, is a dog that's technically not owned. And so the Dog Management Act and our Dog Management Bylaw, which is made under the Dog Control Act, is not for unowned dogs.
Okay, I've located the letter, and I'm sure that I forwarded it to the committee, but maybe I didn't. If it's okay, can I table it at this meeting, and I'll quickly read it to you? Okay. From Jack Raw, and it was sent on the 14th of March. As Chair of the Northern Regional Council Biodiversity and Biosecurity Working Party, I wish to congratulate the FNDC on your Council's participation in the multi-agency alliance that has been formed to better manage the issues of uncontrolled dogs in the far north. The alliance is working well, and we are supportive of the collab approach being taken by your Council initiatives to ensure that domestic dogs in the settlements of the far north are well cared for and pose a reduced risk of becoming wild and roaming. Since writing to you last October on the matter, it's also been brought to my attention that there may be an opportunity for an early review of the dog control bylaw. I believe this would add further tools to the toolbox in respect of managing the impact of uncontrolled dogs that's not good grammar. Managing the impact uncontrolled dogs have on beaches and in other natural areas where they place native wildlife at risk. I understand the regulations establish a 5-year time frame for review of the bylaws, and although this is not due for some time, bringing forward a review is within your statutory powers. In my view, this would be another positive step forward in helping manage this most difficult issue. He's been contacted by several far north people regarding an increase of dogs disturbing and killing native birds on beaches, and this issue is likely to become more prominent. So that was the letter. Nobody saw it. Okay. It's been tabled as so it's a record of this meeting then, and I'm happy for staff to respond to Jack.
Madam Chair, there are two, if I may, there's two parts to that. The Northern Regional Council is a party to cross-agency, multi-organisation approach to feral dogs. There's a bit of crossover in the letter that I sense from talking on the one hand about feral dogs and uncontrolled dogs to dogs on beaches attacking dotterel. So there's the two distinct issues here. It's dog attacks on birds, dotterel on beaches, which is quite specific to the Taupo Bay location. And then there's the feral dogs issue, which is a much bigger issue, and we're working as a group with MPI, NRC, and also DOC, DOC's the other agency involved. So uncontrolled dogs in urban settings may lead to attacks on beaches. Uncontrolled dogs in rural settings or in forestry blocks or on dock land is quite different. That's where feral dogs, are relevant. So I think the letter refers to all of that as one problem when it's not. the discussion today is about the bylaw and what we do about reviewing what you as a committee want to do about the bylaw and the review of that bylaw as it relates to wildlife and dogs on beaches. And I think the feral dogs is quite separate.
Okay, thank you for that. And Rochelle, you wish to add?
I was just going to add that although, you know, there may be people sort of, we'd need some really supportive evidence from perhaps Department of Conservation in regards to the impact on wildlife rather than being based around an RFS public complaints that it may, you know, there's certainly the impact of what they believe is needing to come through before you could solidly say, because the RFS are low, which guides us on our beach patrols and, you know, how we can resource and everything like that. However, they are the experts in knowing what their impact is on their wildlife, and they should have evidence to prove that. And I think that would be better to base a decision.
Thank you, Rochelle. Roger, did you want to add something else to that?
Yeah, just on the letter in the paragraph of which starts as I understand the regulation establish a 5-year review timetable. That's not currently the situation. So it is a 10-year review. So I think that is not correct. So for us to respond back to NRC would just explain that we actually have a 10-year review for this bylaw because it is an existing bylaw.
Thanks, Roger. I had one more question. In the report, you talk about, you know, what information you require. So if people were to email with a clear photo of the offending dog, and does it need to be photo evidence of the number plate of the owner's vehicle, or can it just be the number plate?
So we need to have to clearly see the offence occurring. So it's a bit like picking up your dog poo. People can argue that I picked it up after the photo was taken, that I moved on and then came back with the bag 3 hours later. And so we can, you know, from members of the public, if they can clearly identify a dog or a dog owner, perhaps from a registration that it was uncontrolled at the beach at that time, we'd be able to then use that information to contact the dog owner to have an educational discussion with them about the fact that we had reports from the public of their dog being not under control at the beach at this time and everything like that, and have a discussion with them. Unless we actually saw the offence happening of that dog, you know, a photo showing that uncontrolled, if it clearly shows the boundaries where it can and can't be and everything like that, then yes, we could potentially go forward, you know, after that graduated enforcement of going through for a thing. For a dog attack on wildlife, we would actually have to see some physical evidence of that dog attacking and killing or hurting those things. It's a bit like even if a dog went into a chicken coop and was seen with a dead chicken in its mouth, it actually doesn't prove that that dog killed the chicken, but it's got a dead chicken in its mouth. So so we actually have to clearly see that evidence, and so it is a difficult one. So unless we do have you know, officers on beaches at all times seeing for themselves that, you know, this has kind of happened, it is a difficult one to enforce.
It is, yeah. So if people take photos of the dog, it's got to be clearly identified where it is, showing that it's doing the wrong thing, and clear information to identify who the owner is. Yeah, thank you, Rochelle. Okay, so at this stage, committee, it doesn't sound like we are reviewing the bylaw. At the end of towards the end of the deliberations for the 2018 bylaw, there was a bit of a rush when we got to the beaches pages, and I was hoping that we could come back to amend the schedules in the back of the bylaw, but I haven't had a response on whether we can just simply do some, you know, because we didn't finish the beaches, we did like 1 or 2, but the rest were left. Roger, do you have a response on schedules, or is it part of a whole review?
I'll respond on schedules. I'm just seeking some further legal advice on it, but the advice that from memory that we had on that, it doesn't matter if the content is in the actual body of the bylaw or in a schedule. If it's significant, then it needs to go out for public consultation. So I think the question that's been asked is, can we modify the schedules and make a change to a bylaw via resolution of council? And my answer to that would be, and again, I'm just seeking some legal advice on that, would be, you can only do it if it's deemed not significant.
Not significant.
Okay, great.
Can I raise a question? Yeah. We recently adopted the parking control delegation from Wakakotahi. And we were told at that time that we could add and subtract things from the schedule. So I'm unclear why that would be different to this process. So if that could be put to our in-house legal counsel for some clarity, I think that would be really helpful in informing elected members moving forward. Just in relation to your letter, and I will read it again at my leisure when I get home, but I do notice that we've only had two complaints about protected wildlife, but that letter seems to imply that there's a lot more. So could we write back and ask them for the evidence? Because there's hearsay and then there's evidence. And I think it would be really useful for us not to be reactive.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Thanks, committee members, for all the discussion on this. Oh, Belinda, you
Just on that, just a thought came to mind when Anne asked that. Do we know if these are individuals or organisations? Because I think that is relevant if those two complaints are like Forest and Bird or DOT themselves rather than individuals. It'd be good to have. Again, it's the devil's in the detail.
Or the same individual.
Yes, yeah,
Madam Chair, these figures are only what are reported to us through the RFS process, so that's all we can.
Yeah, okay. Right, we've received that report. All those, Roger.
Sorry, just prior might be to give a
And good morning, everybody. I can just answer about the reviews and schedules. So we can add to a schedule to a bylaw, like for parking or for dogs. The individual decision, so some, for example, if we were to add in a disability parking space, that wouldn't be considered significant. We could just quite easily do that. But however, the issue of, say, dogs on a beach would be significant for that community. And so that would require a targeted consultation with that community. And so with regards to the parking delegations, we will be doing a consultation because that will be significant for those four communities that are affected by those delegations. So some decisions are straightforward. We can do it by resolution, but others will require targeted consultation.
Thank you for that, Brian. Putting this one to bed now. Everybody in favour? Aye. Thank you for your time, Brian and Roger. Item 5.4, District Services Monthly Business Report for February 2022. The resolution is that the Regulatory Compliance Committee received the report District Services Monthly Business Report for February 2022. Do I have a member and a seconder? And Councillor Collard, thank you very much. Dean, do you wish to?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is a February report. We have since circulated the March report. It was a timing issue, as has happened previously, to get these items onto the committee agenda. We had a lag, so there is a March report that's been circulated. The one area I would highlight, and there is a discussion following this committee, a briefing around resource consents. If I were to highlight one area of concern, it would be resource consents. And there are a number of factors at play there. I just mentioned that at this point. Happy to take any questions on the content of this report, which covers all areas of the group. And if there are questions about resource consents, perhaps we could take those, but also bearing in mind that there's a briefing following this committee, we could then have a further, more in-depth discussion later.
Thanks for that, Dean. I'm just trying to find the copy that you distributed. I know our meeting is just about over, but do we need a break? No? Okay.
I have to leave for another meeting just to be able to chair.
Okay. What's the time now?
Yes, Anne. Christian. Just on the resource consents, when I was reading the agenda and I was reading on page 49, I thought, okay, I now see what the problem is, but I don't see what the solution might look like. And then I got to page 81, and there's a really good synopsis on page 81. And I know we're going to have a chat about this afternoon, Chair, but we are in public, and I do think we've addressed it. And I think this is also an advocacy thing that the government needs to be having a conversation about, because the pressure on the industry is not unique to the Farmers District Council. And we are experiencing high rates of staff attrition for a number of reasons. One of them being poaching by Crown agencies who can afford to offer more lucrative packages, and yet the government has done nothing about addressing the statutory timeframes and the financial penalties around the statutory timeframes. So, following on from our next conversation, is there something that we should be saying as a sector, that you cannot on the one hand poach all our staff and then on the other hand penalise us for non-compliance? And what are the steps towards fixing this? And it can't just be ours to fix alone. Now that I have just focused on poaching, there are other reasons there, like significantly high volumes and the degree of complexity, and we'll get to those later. But I just wanted to make sure that you realise that I did kind of have the big picture in mind, Dr. Dean.
Madam Chair, through you, yes, it would certainly help to have some advocacy, it would certainly help, but something I have discussed with the Chief Executive is, again, writing to the Minister for the Environment, David Parker, and updating him, so front-footing and providing the Ministry for the Environment a summary of where we are now and some of the real challenges we face. We've done that previously, rather than wait for the Ministry to pick us up on their radar, as they will other councils, because not only ourselves, there are several councils who are in a very similar situation to ourselves at the moment. And the poaching is very relevant, mainly consultancies, I would say, rather than government departments, but they're not excluded. The number of planners in New Zealand is in short supply. They're just not enough. And then we've got the high volume, which is driven by a number of factors, which we'll expand on a bit later, including the notification of the district plan. A lot of people are trying to get ahead of the play on the notification of the new plan, and they're therefore lodging their consents. Where we can, we are extending timeframes under Section 37, but we can't legitimately do that in instances, so we can't just buy time by doubling the number of days to 40. Where appropriate, we are doing that, but we're also taking a number of steps to address the problem in terms of what we can control. We have had some challenges around communication, which we are addressing, communicating to customers or applicants or their agents in a way where they are having their expectations managed in a positive way, because I don't think we were doing that particularly well. And we are now addressing that, because when someone is told they're going to wait 50 days for their consent, they're not happy, clearly not, and people can't be expected to be happy. But just clarifying and providing more information around the why, and those things that we can control. So I think, you know, those are just some responses to the points that have been made.
Yeah, thank you, Dean.
Still, in terms of that, Dean, I certainly appreciate where you're at with that. The public at large still sees that bloody council's holding me up again, and I can't see that changing. I'm not really sure what we can do about it. The other thing, of course, it is doing this feeding inflation to pushing costs up, which really makes the punter somewhat disgruntled that something is costing so much more because of delays. Yeah, it's common.
Any other comments on the report? No, we're well covered. Okay. All those in favour in receiving this report? Aye. Okay, we have item 5.6, that the Regulatory Compliance Committee received a report action sheet update April 2022, and we have no outstanding actions on our action sheet. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
See you. So, a mover and a seconder, please. And Belinda, thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Right, I'm going to close our meeting. There I go. Thank you everybody online that joined us. Hope it was exciting for you as it was for me. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata pai o tō tātou ariki, o ihe karaiti me te aroha, me te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, amene. Thank you everybody. Thank you. Lunch is ready. Oh, lunch is ready.